I'm Jake, 30 years old, and I swear I didn't wake up expecting anything unusual that morning. I remember opening my eyes already feeling that heaviness in my chest, the same one I always got before dealing with my dad. I had driven down to my hometown the night before because my mom said my dad wanted to clear the air, which usually meant I'd get blamed for something I didn't do. Still, I convinced myself maybe things would be different this time. I spent the morning pacing around the guest room, staring at the same posters I had when I was a teenager. The whole place smelled like detergent and old carpet, and it felt like stepping back into a version of myself I wanted to forget. My dad was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs, sitting at the table like he owned the air everyone breathed. He didn't even look up at me when I walked in, just kept stirring his coffee like he was waiting for me to apologize for something. Mom was pretending to clean the counter even though it was spotless. That's always her move when things get tense. I sat across from him and tried to start with something neutral. I asked how he'd been, and he shrugged like the question annoyed him. There was this silence that felt like it stretched across the whole house. I kept thinking maybe I should have stayed home. Maybe this whole visit was a mistake. But I stayed because I've always stayed. I stayed because I still believed, deep down, that if I tried hard enough, things could actually get better. I watched him take a long sip of coffee before he finally said anything. He didn't ask how I was doing. He didn't mention the job I had just gotten. He didn't ask about the girl I had been seeing for months. He didn't ask anything. He just said my name like it was a burden. That was the moment I knew the day was going to turn into something I wouldn't forget. I could feel it in the way he breathed, like he'd been rehearsing this conversation. And for some reason, I still wasn't ready for what actually came next. He started the way he always did, pointing out something small and acting like it symbolized my entire life. This time it was the fact that I hadn't parked straight in the driveway. He said it like it explained 20 years of disappointment. I tried to laugh it off, but he didn't even blink. He said I'd always been careless, always been off, always made things harder for the family. I asked him what he meant, trying not to sound defensive, even though everything inside me tightened. He leaned back in his chair like he'd been waiting to drop that line for years. He said, "You've always been the problem." My mom froze at the counter, but didn't turn around. That part hurt more than what he said. I asked him why he felt that way, but he just waved his hand like I was wasting his time. He brought up stuff from when I was a kid, things so old I barely remembered them. Breaking a window when I was 9, failing algebra in high school, getting into an argument with him before I moved out. He talked like every mistake I'd made was some huge betrayal. I sat there realizing he had this whole list saved up, waiting for the perfect moment to unload it. My chest started burning, and it felt like the kitchen was shrinking around me. I told him everyone messes up, but he said I messed up more than most. He said my brother never caused problems like I did. He said I drained the family's energy, whatever that meant. Mom finally whispered something like, "Henry, stop," but he ignored her. I tried to stay calm, but I could feel myself slipping. I couldn't tell if I wanted to scream or disappear. And then he brought up something I hadn't heard in years, something that hit way harder than the rest. He mentioned the night I left for college, which he always described like I had abandoned them. He said I walked out without caring what I left behind. In reality, that night was one of the worst nights of my life. He had screamed at me for running away, even though I had earned a scholarship and wanted a future. But he twisted it again, making it sound like me trying to build a life with some personal attack on him. He said they struggled financially after I left, something he never told me. He said I didn't check in enough, that I didn't act like part of the family. It stunned me because I remembered calling, texting, visiting when I could. I asked him why he never said any of this before. He just shrugged, said I should have known. That word hit me weird. Known what? Known that everything bad that ever happened somehow looped back to me? I looked over at my mom, hoping she'd finally say something real. She just stared at the sink like she was glued to it. That's when something clicked in my chest. It felt like the moment you realize a chair you've been sitting on for years has been broken the whole time. You just never leaned far enough back to notice. I realized this wasn't about anything I had done that morning. It wasn't even about the driveway or the past or college. It was about him needing someone to blame for whatever he felt about his own life. I think deep down he knew that. And I think deep down I always knew that too. But hearing him say it so bluntly, so confidently, did something to me. I didn't get angry. I just felt something inside me settle in a way I can't fully explain. Like the truth wasn't new. It was just finally undeniable. I remember pushing my chair back slowly because I didn't trust my legs to stand. My hands were shaking, and I hated that he could see it. He smirked a little, like my reaction proved his point. That made something in me harden. I told him, quietly, that I wasn't going to sit there and be blamed for the entire family's problems. My voice cracked, but it was steady enough. He said I was being dramatic. He said this is why no one could rely on me. That one stung because I'd spent my whole adult life doing the opposite. But arguing felt pointless, like trying to put out a fire with a wet napkin. I took a breath and said I should go. Mom finally turned toward me, but her face was unreadable. She said nothing like stay or don't go. She just said, drive safe, which somehow hurt more than anything else that day. I walked outside, and the sun was way too bright. My car felt hotter than usual, and I stood there for a second with my hand on the door handle. I kept waiting for someone to call after me. No one did. Inside the house, I could hear muffled voices, like they had already moved on to some other conversation. I got in my car and started the engine, but I didn't pull out right away. I stared at the house I grew up in, trying to figure out why it suddenly felt unfamiliar. It was like looking at a place I had only visited in dreams, not somewhere I had lived for years. Something in me shifted right then, and I knew that whatever had been broken between me and my dad wasn't fixable anymore. As I finally backed out of the driveway, I saw my dad standing in the kitchen window. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't yelling or pointing or blaming. He was just staring at me with this blank, unreadable expression. I don't know why, but that bothered me more than everything he said earlier. It was like he didn't see me at all, like I was already gone in his mind. I drove down the street slowly, expecting my phone to buzz with a text from my mom. It didn't. I checked twice because I thought maybe I missed it. Nothing. I reached the stop sign at the end of their street and felt this weird calm settle over me. Not relief, not sadness, just calm, like something had finally stopped pushing down on my shoulders. I thought about all the times I tried to earn his approval. All the times I thought if I worked harder, stayed longer, apologized first, things might finally shift. But that day showed me the truth. It wasn't me he was fighting. It was whatever was broken in him. I kept driving until the house disappeared in my rearview mirror. And the strangest part is that I still don't know if he realized how much he revealed that morning. It was the day I finally understood him, and the day I stopped trying to fix something that never belonged to me in the first place. I didn't go straight home after leaving their street. I pulled into a random gas station about 10 minutes away and just sat there with the engine running. I wasn't crying or shaking or anything dramatic like that. I just felt hollow, like someone had scooped something out of me without asking. I stared at the people coming in and out of the store, living their normal mornings, and I wondered how many of them had moments like mine tucked away. Moments when something big breaks quietly. I kept replaying his words in my head, not because they were new, but because of how certain he sounded saying them. You've always been the problem. It echoed in a way that felt like it belonged to an older version of me, not the person I'd become. I thought about calling someone, maybe my brother, but that felt pointless. He and my dad were always aligned, even when things didn't make sense. I didn't blame him for that, but it made reaching out feel useless. I checked my phone again. Still nothing from my mom. I think that was the part that messed with me. She knew exactly how that conversation went. She heard every word, but silence was easier for her. I sat there long enough that a delivery truck had pulled in, unloaded crates, and left again. I eventually turned off the engine because it felt stupid to keep it running with nowhere to go. I leaned back in the seat and closed my eyes for a second. It wasn't exhaustion, just pressure. This slow realization settling in that maybe I had been trying to fix the wrong relationship my entire life. Not the one with my dad, but the one with myself. Because I think a part of me believed his opinion mattered more than it ever should have. And for the first time, I questioned if that belief was something I could let go of. After a while, I decided to get something to drink, mostly just to move. The store was freezing inside, that kind of cold that hits you harder after leaving the heat. I grabbed a bottled iced tea, paid for it, and stood by the window drinking it slowly because I didn't want to get back in the car yet. There was an older guy at one of the tables, reading a newspaper like it was still 1998. He didn't look at me, and I didn't look at him, but something about the normalcy was grounding. I kept thinking about how predictable my dad had become. The routine of blame, disappointment, rewriting history, like he needed it to function. I wondered if he even realized how rehearsed he sounded. I wondered if he ever asked himself why he never said those things when they were actually happening. It was always retroactive pain with him, always rewriting the past to justify the present. I took another sip of tea and realized I wasn't angry anymore. Just tired. Tired in a way that didn't make me want to sleep, but made me want to start over. Like clean slate tired. I checked my phone again out of habit. Still nothing. For a second I considered texting her first, but I knew what would happen. She'd respond politely, maybe apologize in a soft way, but she wouldn't challenge him. She never did. And maybe that was its own truth I hadn't wanted to see. I finished the drink and tossed the bottle in the trash. The moment it clattered inside the bin, something clicked in me again. A weird feeling I couldn't place yet. The sense that the day wasn't done revealing things. I got back in my car and decided to take the long route out of town. Part of me just wanted to stall before going back to my apartment. Driving always helped me think, even if it didn't fix anything. The road out toward the old industrial park was mostly empty. I used to go there as a teenager when I needed space. It hadn't changed much. Same broken fences, same faded signs, same abandoned warehouse with graffiti from kids who probably had their own family messes. As I drove past it, my phone finally buzzed. My heart jumped before I even looked. But it wasn't my mom. It was my dad. Just seeing his name made my stomach twist. The message was short. 5 words. No explanation. No apology. Just, do not come back here. I stared at the screen for a few seconds, trying to understand if it was supposed to hurt me or free me. I didn't respond. I didn't even feel shock. It felt weirdly expected, like the conversation that morning wasn't enough for him. He needed the last word, even in text form. I put the phone face down on the passenger seat. The industrial road stretched out in front of me, dry and empty. And for the first time that day, I felt something close to relief. Not because of the message, but because it showed me exactly where I stood. There was no guessing anymore. No hoping. Just clarity. And clarity, even painful, felt better than confusion. I kept driving until I reached a small, overlooked spot near the river. I had forgotten how quiet it was there. The water barely moved, and the air felt heavier than anywhere else in town. I parked, left the windows open, and just listened to the faint sound of wind through the trees. It reminded me of all the times I came there to escape fights at home. Back then I thought I just needed space. Now I realized I had needed distance. I leaned forward with my head resting on the steering wheel. Not crying, just breathing. Slow, steady breaths that felt like my body was finally catching up to my brain. I picked up my phone again, half hoping my mom had texted. Nothing. Not even a missed call. The silence from her felt heavier than anything my dad could say, because she had watched that whole scene play out. She knew exactly what he had told me, and she still chose silence. It hit me then that she wasn't neutral. She was complicit, not in a malicious way, but in a comfortable, familiar way. Comfortable with the brokenness. Comfortable pretending it was normal. I sat back and looked out at the river, feeling that same weird calm from earlier. Like the day was rearranging everything I thought I knew. I didn't know what my next move was, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't go back to being who I was that morning. Something had shifted too much, too deeply, even if I didn't fully understand it yet. I must have sat there for almost an hour before I realized I wasn't alone. Another car had pulled into the overlook, a beat-up sedan with faded paint. I didn't think much of it until I saw who stepped out. It was my brother. I hadn't talked to him in months. He walked toward my car cautiously, like he wasn't sure whether I'd roll down the window or drive off. I didn't move. He got close enough to knock, and I finally lowered the window a few inches. He looked tense, like he'd rushed over. He asked if I was okay, and the question felt strange coming from him. I told him I was fine, even though fine didn't cover it. He shifted his weight from foot to foot, avoiding eye contact. Then he said Dad had told him I stormed out. That phrase pissed me off more than anything. Stormed out. I'd barely raised my voice. I told him what actually happened. Not exaggerated, not softened. Just the truth. He listened quietly, which surprised me. No defending Dad, no excuses. Just listening. For a second, I thought maybe there was something he wanted to say. But he didn't. He just stood there, hands in his pockets, staring at the ground, like whatever he had heard earlier had shaken him too. And that's when the day took a turn I still can't fully explain. My brother didn't say much at first, and honestly that made me nervous. He wasn't usually the quiet type, especially when it came to defending our dad. He kept glancing back at his car like he was torn about even being there. I asked him why he came, and he said he thought I should hear something. Those words alone put a knot in my stomach. He sat down on the edge of the overlook railing, rubbing his palms together the way he always did when he was anxious. He said Dad had been in one of his moods long before I showed up that morning. Apparently, he'd been pacing around the house since sunrise, muttering to himself about things from years ago, things nobody had even brought up. My brother said Mom tried to calm him down, but gave up after a while. Then he looked at me and said something that caught me off guard. He said, "He's not angry at you. He's angry at everything." At first, I didn't know what to do with that. Was it supposed to make me feel better? Because it didn't. I told him that didn't excuse anything Dad said. He nodded, saying he knew, and that's what scared him. I asked what that meant, but he didn't answer right away. Instead, he told me he wasn't sure Dad was all there anymore. That Mom had been covering for him more than we thought. Suddenly, the silence from my mom made more sense. Not in a comforting way, but in a revealing one. My brother looked tired, really tired, in a way I'd never noticed before. He said Dad had been rewriting old memories for months, arguing with people who weren't even arguing with him, misplacing money and insisting someone stole it. It was like the ground under us shifted a little more with each sentence. I leaned back in my seat, trying to process everything he'd just dumped on me. Part of me wanted to be compassionate, to understand Dad's behavior through a different lens. But another part of me was exhausted from carrying the weight of his anger my whole life. I told my brother I felt bad if something was wrong with Dad, but that didn't erase what happened. He agreed. He said none of it made what Dad said that morning okay, but he thought I deserved context. I didn't know whether to thank him or get angry at him for waiting this long to tell me. He said he didn't say anything earlier because he honestly thought Dad would snap out of it, that it was just stress or age or frustration. But then he said something that stuck with me. He said Dad talked about me constantly, not in a good way, not in a kind way, but obsessively. Like every setback in his own life somehow connected back to something I did or didn't do. My stomach twisted hearing that. It made the message earlier, "Do not come back here," hit differently. My brother said he wanted me to know because he didn't want me thinking I caused any of this. He said Dad had been unraveling for a while, and I just happened to be the easiest target. It was a lot to take in. And the truth is, I didn't know how to feel. Angry? Relieved? Sad? All three mixed together in this weird, heavy lump in my chest. I looked at the river again, wondering how long this had been building without anyone telling me. My brother stepped closer to the car and lowered his voice, like someone else might be listening even though we were alone. He asked if Dad had said anything out of character that morning. I snorted because the whole conversation felt out of character, but I told him the worst parts. When I mentioned the "you've always been the problem" line, my brother flinched like someone had slapped him. He asked if Dad said anything else about the past, anything that didn't make sense. I said yes, pretty much everything. He nodded slowly, almost like he was confirming something to himself. Then he said Dad had been mixing memories recently, blending real events with things that never actually happened. He said last week Dad accused him of breaking a car window that I knew for a fact I broke when I was 9. He said Dad sometimes talked like we were still teenagers. Then other times he'd talk like we were strangers. Hearing that made my stomach drop. As much as I wanted to stay angry at my dad, the idea that he was losing his grip on reality scared me more than I expected. My brother put a hand on top of the car door, like he was bracing himself. He said Mom didn't want anyone to know because she thought people would judge him or treat him differently. So she covered, deflected, redirected. Anything to protect the image of who he used to be. But the cracks were showing. And that morning, they finally split open. I didn't know what to say, so I just stared at him. He looked like he had aged years since the last time I saw him. Like he had been carrying this weight alone. And without warning, I felt something soften in me. I opened the car door and stepped out, standing beside him. The breeze off the river felt colder than before, but grounding. He said he didn't expect me to fix anything. He just wanted me to understand what I walked into. I told him I appreciated it, even if it hurt. We stood there quietly for a minute, both staring at the water like it had answers. Then he asked the question I'd been avoiding all day. "What are you going to do now?" I didn't have a real answer. I told him I didn't plan on going back to the house anytime soon. He nodded like he expected that. He said he'd keep an eye on Dad and try to convince Mom to get help. I told him not to let it fall all on him. He shrugged and said it already kind of had. That felt like another punch to the chest. I realized then how much distance had formed between me and my family. Not miles, emotional distance. Years of it. And maybe that distance wasn't just because of Dad. Maybe I had pulled away too, little by little, without realizing it. I looked at my brother and saw someone who wasn't my adversary. Just another kid who grew up in the same storm. We talked a little more, mostly about practical stuff. What he'd noticed. What he was worried about. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel alone in it. Eventually, he said he needed to head back before Mom started worrying. We said a quick goodbye, not emotional, just real. He walked back to his car, but before he got in, he hesitated. He turned around and said, "Jake, none of this is your fault." It was simple, but it landed harder than anything else that day. I nodded, not trusting my voice. He drove off, leaving me alone again in the quiet overlook. I watched his taillights disappear down the road, and then everything felt incredibly still. Not peaceful, not unsettling, just still. Like the world paused for a second to let me breathe. I got back in my car, but didn't turn it on right away. I rested my head against the seat and stared at the sky through the windshield. Clouds were drifting slowly, and for some reason they looked unfamiliar. Maybe everything looked unfamiliar after that morning. I finally turned the key, listening to the engine hum. I felt that same calm from earlier settling again. But now it came with a strange clarity, like something invisible had been cut loose. Not in a dramatic, life-changing way, just a quiet shift. I didn't fully understand it, but I knew that whatever came next wasn't going to be like before. I pulled out of the overlook slowly, letting the road guide me. And something about the day felt like it still wasn't finished showing me things, even though I didn't know what those things were yet. On the way back toward the highway, I drove slower than usual, almost like my body didn't trust itself to move too fast after everything that happened. The town looked different, even though nothing had changed. Same old gas stations, same cracked sidewalks, same faded billboards. But something about knowing what was happening at home made all of it feel heavier. I passed the high school, the park, the old library where I used to study, and each one felt like a reminder of a version of life that never really existed the way I thought it did. I pulled into a small parking lot near the community center just to sit for a minute. My phone was still face down on the passenger seat, like I didn't want to acknowledge it. I kept thinking about my dad, about all those moments growing up that I brushed off as just his temper. Now I wasn't sure what was temper and what was something else entirely. But even if he was losing himself, it didn't erase how deeply his words cut. It didn't erase the years of blame and pressure. The years I spent trying to be better for someone who wasn't even seeing me clearly. I leaned back and watched people walking into the community center, parents holding their kids' hands, couples laughing, teenagers messing around. Normal life. Simple moments that felt so far away from anything I grew up with. I wondered what it would have felt like to have a dad who said he was proud of me even once. Just once. Not for something big, just for existing. That thought hit harder than I expected. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't sad. I was just realizing things I didn't want to realize. Realizing that sometimes the truth doesn't show up as one big revelation. Sometimes it sneaks up on you in pieces. All in one day. After a while, I finally turned my phone over. Still no message from my mom. Not even a missed call. It was like I had vanished from the family, and they were carrying on like the morning never happened. The silence from her wasn't neutral. It felt intentional in a way that made my chest tighten. I typed a message to her, just something simple like, "Are you okay?" But I didn't send it. I stared at the unsent text for a good minute before deleting it. Reaching out felt like undoing the clarity I'd gained, like reopening a wound that was finally closing. Instead, I opened my brother's message thread. I thought about sending him a thank you for coming to talk to me, but I didn't send that either. Not because I didn't mean it, but because I wasn't ready to talk about anything beyond what we already said. I set the phone aside again. I rested my hands on the steering wheel and felt the weight of the day settle in my bones. A weird part of me felt older, not in a tired way, but in a way that felt like I finally understood something everyone else had known for years. The world outside my car kept moving. People walked in and out of the building. Cars pulled in and out of parking spaces. Life didn't care that my entire perspective had shifted. And somehow, that was comforting, because it meant the next steps were mine. Not dictated by my dad. Not defined by that house. Mine. I eventually pulled back onto the highway and started heading home. The sky had gotten a little darker, that late afternoon dimming that comes faster in smaller towns. I drove with the windows down, letting the wind hit my face, hoping it would help me clear my head. Every mile I put between myself and that house felt like peeling off another layer I didn't need anymore. I kept replaying pieces of the morning, but they felt distant, like echoes instead of punches. The more I replayed them, the more I realized how long I had been trying to earn something from him that he never had to give, and maybe never would. I passed the last exit before the highway opened up into long stretches of empty road. It was weird how freeing it felt, like I was leaving the version of myself that lived for his approval behind. Somewhere around mile marker 20, I finally felt my shoulders loosen. Not completely, but enough to notice. It was the first moment all day where my body felt aligned with my mind. Not tense, not bracing for something else. Just present. I didn't know what the future looked like with my family after this. Maybe nothing would change. Maybe everything would. But the road kept moving forward, and so did I. For once, I wasn't driving back to something. I was driving away from it. And somehow, that felt like the closest thing to peace I'd had in years. When I got home, the apartment felt strangely quiet, but not in a lonely way. More like it was giving me space. I dropped my keys on the counter and stood there for a second, letting the stillness settle. It wasn't the kind of quiet that made me feel small. It was the kind that made me feel like I could breathe for the first time in a long time. I changed into clean clothes and sat on the edge of my bed, replaying the moment my brother told me none of it was my fault. Those words echoed louder than anything my dad said. I didn't turn on the TV or music. I didn't distract myself. I just let everything process. Not all at once, just pieces. Pieces that felt less sharp now. I checked my phone again before setting it on the nightstand. No new messages. And for the first time in years, that didn't feel like a wound. It felt like information. Just information. I lay back on the bed and stared at the ceiling, noticing a crack I hadn't seen before. Maybe it had always been there. Maybe I was only noticing it now because I was finally still enough to see things clearly. The same way I had finally seen my dad clearly. Not as the man I kept hoping he would be, but as the man he really was that morning. And once you see the truth like that, you can't unsee it. I must have dozed off for a bit, because when I opened my eyes the room was darker. I didn't remember falling asleep. For a moment, I couldn't tell if minutes or hours had passed. But everything felt strangely calm, more than it had all day. I reached for my phone out of instinct. One new message. For a second, my chest tightened thinking it was my mom. But it wasn't. It was from an unknown number. Just one sentence. You should come back tomorrow. No name. No context. Nothing else. I sat there staring at it, feeling a chill crawl up my spine. I checked the area code. It was from my hometown. But I didn't recognize the number. I waited for a follow-up message. None came. I didn't know if it was my brother, or my mom, or someone else entirely. I didn't respond. I didn't delete it either. I just kept looking at it, realizing the day hadn't ended as cleanly as I thought. And I still don't know who sent it or why. All I know is that the timing wasn't random. And whatever truth I thought I uncovered that morning, there was more behind it. Something I still haven't figured out, even now.